but again, I don't see you guys. I don't have you guys, but if you see me, that's fine.
We see your slides, Professor Farhady.
Okay. All right then. Thank you so very much, everybody, and thank you for inviting me for this event. I'm very pleased to meet some young scholars and student teachers or teachers. I am from ELT department at Yeditepe University in Turkey, Istanbul. And this is my email. If anyone had any question that I could not catch through the presentation, that's fine. You can email me. And I thought this would be the right title for your center. Is that right? Okay. Now, the purpose of my talk, it's not a talk, it's a kind of informal conversation for me. But I'll try to accomplish a couple of things. One is I would love to talk about the principles of learning-oriented assessment and new development in teaching and learning. Then I'll suggest some practical tasks for teachers that I tried in my classes and they worked. And then I will leave the floor to you guys if you have any questions regarding the points and issues we discussed here. I would like to start with the cycle of instruction. I would not be very theoretical. I'll just try to pick up the points that are necessary for communication between you and me. Well, all of us are teachers, and as teachers, we teach, whatever that is. In our case, it is language. And when we teach, we expect some will hopefully learn. And to claim for learning, to claim that our students, our learners truly learned, we need evidence. And evidence comes from testing, any sort of testing, from simple questioning class up to 500 multiple choice grammar tests. Doesn't make any difference, but it is a kind of testing. Even oral interview, your impression from the class, your conversation with the students. You can make the instant assessment of your students' abilities. And based on the results, we make a decision on the learner. I would like to emphasize the decision is a very, very light word, but it has serious consequences. So it is an important issue that we try to make decisions that are fair and just to all students. And this cycle, though it seems very simple, but it is very complicated and abstract. I will not go into it. I will try to show what is. Oh, by the way, this is not EFL exclusive. It can apply to all classroom contexts. So to show you the a little bit of complexity, we usually see as teachers or students teaching that leads to learning, and to show that learning happened, we go with testing. But we usually ignore many issues in this line. Who the teacher is, who the learner is, who the tester is. In some cases, they are not the same people. What do they teach? What do they learn? What do they test? Where is the instruction happening? Why are we doing what we are doing? Now, I call this part teaching, learning, testing, very straightforward, and I call it the light side of our business. But this part, I call it the dark side of the business. And the problems start exactly from here. And I'll show you some of them. I'm sure in your courses you have been familiarized with the idea of constant changes in our field. We have had many changes in the definition of language, or in my time, language was describing the rules. Present tense is a kind of tense that refers to an action that happens regularly. I still remember from my high school. But now that is not the definition of language. Language is a means of communication. And they're two different things. In terms of teaching, we have moved from teaching rules of translation to some sort of strategic teaching, meaning that we are not teaching the rules to the students anymore, or the focus is not the rules, but we are trying to use certain strategies, whether cognitive, metacognitive, whatever the strategy, to help learners learn. Learning has changed from memorization to creation of socio-cognitive mentality. What does it mean? Most of us have experienced high-stakes tests like concours. I would like everybody to go back and think about the night of concours and the night after concours. In my case, more than 50% of the information I had in my head was gone, because we had packed everything in a storage without having quite control on it. The purpose was just to get to the test and try to find the right answer. After the concours, after the test, the mind opens up and leaves unnecessary stuff, and all of a sudden you see you've forgotten many things. That is the problem with memorization. But now we are in the area of socio-cognitive mentality, meaning that learning is a different kind of process. In practice, from teacher-centered to learner cooperation, we have moved. I don't know what kind of strategy, what kind of theoretical framework, what kind of teaching methodology you use in your institutions, but right now, or at least my experience, has been like this in Iran, that it is almost always teacher-centered. But now we are shifting and taking the load from teachers' shoulders and directing it in an informed way to students and asking them to take responsibility for their learning. Now, in this continuum of changes, which happened probably every decade, as long as I remember from the last 50 years, there was a breakthrough in our field, and that was this Kumar's guy who divided the teaching business into method and post-method eras. It is not the point of discussion today here, but it had a very significant effect on our teaching, at the same time on testing. In the method era, the focus was on the product of the stored knowledge. We tried to store knowledge, to get information, to collect information, to accumulate them. But now, I'm sure we did not pay attention to how that knowledge was acquired or performed. We did not pay attention to how of it. One of the major questions I asked at the beginning: who, when, why, and how. I'm sure most of you are probably more skillful than I am in obtaining information. Mr. Google is there. Any piece of information you want, it is at your disposal in one click. Just ask Mr. Google, what is the shoe size of Mr. Farhady? It's going to give you 200 Hossein Farhadis with many different shoe sizes. So the idea is that obtaining information is not an issue anymore. Any kind of information you want is available. So Our responsibility as teachers is not to give students information because they are more skillful than we are in finding information. But in the post-method era, the focus shifted from product to the process of instruction. Instruction includes teaching, learning, and testing. And the shift from product to process took a long time and is still not stabilized. In many, many parts of the world, it's not been materialized. And my experience with Iranian education, as long as I was there, the change did not happen. With this change from product to process, I should tell you guys that whatever we have been doing so far, those of you who have information on testing, from early translation tests to discrete point multiple choice tests to integrative closed dictation type tests to functional tests, communicative tests, whatever we have in mind of testing so far had been within the era of product oriented. We paid attention only to what our learners can perform. But it changed. I mean, it changed not with us, but it probably had changed 100 years ago by Dewey, 1916, said education is not an affair of telling or being told, but an active and constructive process. No matter what you hear right now in constructivist sort of theory, they're all coming from Dewey's intention that education is not to tell people, but to make them construct. According to these guys, learning is a highly intellectual process that occurs when learners are involved in many cognitive and metacognitive activities to get a sense of achievement, self-confidence, and move towards self-regulation and autonomy. Probably most of you, within the context of English language teaching or English as a foreign language, are familiar with these concepts: cognitive, metacognitive, sense of achievement, self-confidence, and self-regulation and autonomy. We are familiar with these words, and we have read about these words a lot in different articles, textbooks. But to my knowledge, these words or these concepts have not been translated into the practice of the teachers. They have all been resting at the level of theory. And when we are talking about tasks for learning, these tasks should qualify for these concepts. The task should activate cognitive, metacognitive strategies. The task should give the students a sense of achievement, and it should give them self-confidence and lead them towards self-regulation and autonomy. This is a great breakthrough, and I would like to show you guys what it means in picture. If you consider learning right in the center, learning involves problem solving. So if any task in your class, and it doesn't make any difference, I don't want to see saying that, okay, my students are elementary, they don't know English very much. That doesn't matter. But what we need is to put them in the context where you face a problem and they're going to solve the problem. The problem could be third person singular, period. You don't have, we are not talking about the problems of sending satellites to the moon. We are talking about problems of language. Second one is organizing. I think we need to give students certain tasks and ask them to organize the pieces of information. Very influential, very important in writing. We need to give them tasks that require them to explain what they are doing. This would help them improve their productive skills, either in writing or speaking. Thinking is a key word. If anybody can answer any question without thinking, okay, it means that it is not processed. I'm not talking about automatic chunks that we have acquired. Analyzing, we need to give them tasks that would require them to do analysis, understand the components, see the interrelationship of the components. Transforming, we need to ask them or to give them tasks that would require transformation of information, like transforming a table into language, a language piece into table. This is transforming and transcoding. Predicting. I'm sure in many reading comprehension passages now you see, which of the following do you think would most likely come after the paragraph? This is the power of predicting. It is not just the predicting, but that is the process in mind that leads you to predict. Exploring. Now our students are very skillful in exploring probably not very useful stuff. So we need to direct them into the area of exploring important and useful areas. Applying. Probably one of the major problems right now in Iranian context is that our graduate students do not have a job. I tend to disagree. Our graduate students do not have a skill, let's say. Skillful people have always something to do, because we don't teach our students how to apply their knowledge to real world. Constructing, we need to give them opportunity to construct, to develop, to think. Negotiating, crucial. We need to have them in groups or pairs in class, outside the class, to negotiate. Sharing, a very uncommon feature in Iran. Everybody tries to keep everything for himself. Even I remember when I was giving my books to my students to use and copy, everybody was surprised. Oh, these are yours. Okay, yeah, but what am I going to do with them if I'm not going to use them? Share everything. Creating, try to put them in the context that they could create something. This is going with the idea of you learn by doing. And of course, assessment. We need to give them opportunities to assess themselves, to assess their learning, to assess their progress, to assess their achievements, accomplishments, whether they understand they are learning or not. Assessment is not on the side of the teacher only. Okay, so all these activities, now you can guess for yourself. How many of these activities you try in your class, except for read the comprehension passage and then answer the questions? Now, with this post method, testing lost its momentum because especially important tests like IBT, IELTS, I don't know, Pearson, Michigan, they lost their momentum because they created a very negative washback. People started to study for the test, not to study to learn. We tried to avoid authorities on the side of the test developers, test organizations. Like IBT, for example, governs all youngsters' life in terms of education. Pearson, the same thing. Michigan, the same thing. IELTS, the same thing. They're no difference. They all govern, in fact, the education and educational systems. And we did not want to have that authority over our head after a long, long time. An important point is that they don't care about test takers. They think or give the impression to teachers and academicians that students are not qualified enough to assess. We did not, or at least we were instructed not to pay attention to students' abilities, students' feelings, attitudes, etc. We talk about motivation. Motivation does not happen by order. You gotta be motivated, okay? You gotta have positive attitude. Orders do not work in education. Education requires processing. So, since a lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments against standard tests we were using as outside criteria, probably in your organization you are using PET, CAT, I don't know, ACP, oh, so many names, okay? These are external tests without paying attention to what exactly is going on in class between the student and teachers. So what happened? They said, okay, testing is no good. Let's use the word assessment, because assessment had a more comprehensive perception in the minds of people. Assessment included so many things, just not test. And the moment assessment started, people, this is the fashion in our field, they tried to coin words. Like we came up with performance assessment, authentic assessment, alternative, formative, summative, classroom, dynamic, diagnostic, assessment for and while learning, both contrast with assessment of learning. These terms all flourished in our field, and some of them are used interchangeably, some of them are used erroneously, some of them are used inappropriately, but they are used. Most of them are not assessments. Summative is not assessment. Okay, performance is not assessment. Performance is like an oral interview. Through an oral interview, you collect information about the speaking knowledge of people. Then people created the word term learning-oriented assessment as LOA to cover all these different types of assessment within a classroom and outside classroom context. So LOA has become, within the last probably 10, 15 years, the major concern of educators, teachers, learners, and the community. And I'll explain what LOA means. Now, in LOA context, assessment tasks are not just as tests, but they should stimulate learning practices. It means that assessment should help learning, and learning should help assessment. Learners must actively engage in the assessment activities. What does that mean? If your assessment task is the same as your learning task, then when students get engaged in the process of learning, they're also getting engaged in the process of assessing. And key point, the assessment must provide appropriate and timely feedback, which learners can ultimately feed forward. So this is what we call feedback loop. Feedback, improvement. Your feedback would function as feed forward for the learner. Learner would modify, would change, would make some necessary improvements, then again will hand it in and another feedback. So it's feedback, feed forward, feedback, feed forward until satisfaction is obtained. So it is a systematic, dynamic relationship between teaching, learning, and assessment. It means that's why I call it integration of teaching, learning, and assessing. Probably this slide will show it. In method era, where we focused on only product, we had teaching, which would lead to learning, and we will assess or test what people learned. This is a linear relationship, teaching, learning, testing. And in many, many cases, teachers were not testers, or testers were not teachers. Therefore, there was always a mismatch between what teachers had perception of what they taught and the testers had perception of what they test. And in this in between, the learner, poor learner, is victimized. But this is a pleasant consequence of post-myth era, where within the context of curriculum, this big circle is your curriculum or instructional context, where you have teaching. Look, teaching is not separate from learning, and learning is not separate from assessing. You see, they have some commonalities here. This does not mean that they are the same thing, but they share some fundamental components. When you are teaching, you have an eye on how students learn. When students learn, you have an eye how students show their learning or assessment. Practicality, I don't know, requires a good amount of teacher involvement. My students usually say teachers in this context work more than students. And I think it is true. Constant feedback and sharing the suggestions with class. It means that it is not a communication sort of device between only teacher and a student, but all stakeholders, meaning student, teacher, and administration, are involved. Accommodating some of the procedural changes suggested by students. Now, I have never seen, or never is too strong, I have rarely seen teachers asking students what they like, what they don't like. We have assumed that students do not understand much. We do know better than they do, so they have to listen to us. Of course they have to listen to us, but we can make what they have to listen very pleasant for them by asking their suggestions and implementing their suggestions. In many cases, they make beautiful comments in the direction of improving instruction. And running the class as a cooperative and collaborative community. In one of my talks, one of the teachers asked me, well, students keep asking questions and I have to answer these questions. And I said, well, why do you have to answer the questions? Direct it to the class. If someone asks a question, say, well, that's a very good question. Let's see who can help. And then this would create a dynamics in the classroom of discussion and argument, which is the basis for learning. It is demanding, but a promising process. I am telling you guys, I have been using this technique, this approach, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, for the last 20 years. And I have always been successful. I have always been happy. And I have always enjoyed impressions and feedback from my students. It takes time, especially in grade-oriented communities like Iran, to convince students that they want to change. Learning happens in a different way, not by memorizing. And I am positive it will change the students' attitude towards learning. It is amazing. You guys cannot believe. Amazing. They changed the whole mentality of the students towards learning. Some of these tasks I have experienced and I'm sharing with you. One is self-assessment. As I said, we don't believe students can assess themselves. They would overrate themselves, underrate themselves, depending on their personality. That is fine, but that is the first step in learning process. Nobody can assess me better than I can if I am honest with myself. Learners are the best judges to assess their progress. Anytime I use these sentences, I turn it to audience. I say, you guys have been students, teachers for a long, long time, okay? Have you ever been asked to judge yourself? Have you ever judged yourself whether you learned or you did not learn? But in many, many cases, I have heard negative response. What they know before, what they learned during, and what they will accomplish at the end of the course, they are best judges of themselves. The purpose is to collect information about their own progress. If you develop a trust between you and a student and a student, this mockery attitude of if I made a mistake, everybody would keep laughing. I am afraid of producing something because I may make mistakes. Okay. If we can sort of smooth out this wrong attitude in class, it will happen. They also need to do self-assessment before, during, and at the end of the course, and check their progress and report to class. You cannot imagine how sort of proud they become at the end of the course when they see from the pre-course self-assessment to the post-course self-assessment how much they have accomplished. Reflective essays. I don't know if you guys get reflections from your students, but one of the basic tasks I assign to my students is weekly reflection tasks. Students will share their thoughts with the teacher through weekly 200 word REs, reflective essays. Now, this is very important. In English classes, I used it as a wonderful task to improve their writing, because when they are writing reflections, they are in fact writing automatically, and then their real language appears, and when you give them feedback, the next time they improve their writing. They know that writing a paragraph or so is necessary but not sufficient, because it has a very small point, like half a point out of 100. The purpose of RE is not just to review, but to create discussion. The REs should include their impression of the efficiency of the class, what they learned more, what they learned better, where they had the problem, where they experienced it, boredom. All these perceptions and attitudes would be reflected in the reflective essays, and then you will read them and pick up frequent points and share them with the class. And then if there is something you need to change, if, for example, majority said, we would like to do this assignment like this, okay, for me, it doesn't make any difference. If they like it, let them do it. And I usually ask them to take notes during the course, during the session, because they are fresh immediately after the class. And, you know, at the beginning, they tell me, oh my God, Hocam, I don't know, every week I'm going to write the same thing. But little by little, they understand the purpose of reflective essays, and they say this is one of the best activities that we do, because we share our ideas with you and others, and we get feedback from if we have a problem, if we don't know, if we did not learn something very well next time, because of that reflection, we will discuss it more and the learning will happen. This is something very unique. I call them thought-provoking questions. Now, one of the major issues we experience as teachers, or at least I have experienced, was that It is very difficult to make students read the materials, study the materials, and come to class prepared. Most of them don't. And I didn't find a better way to force them, because the more you force them, the more resistant they're going to get. So I tried another technique. I asked them to write questions. Let's say lesson 7 is about, I don't know, going on a trip. So you read it, and suppose you want to test your students or test yourself, write 2, 3 items about it. Now, this business has a couple of advantages. First, it forces them to read and study, because without reading and studying, they're not going to be able to write good questions. Second, it requires students to share their questions with others and get comments from them. An example, for example, asking what is the meaning of a particular word is not a TPQ, is not a thought-provoking, because you can check it with your dictionary, with your mobile immediately. But asking something like how various meanings of a word can be exemplified may serve as a good TPQ, since it requires thinking and providing explanatory responses. And in many cases, it would create disagreement among students. That is what I love. When they disagree, they start talking, they start negotiating, and that is exactly when learning happens. And I give them a very detailed instruction on how to do it and how to share the job. For example, in individual group performance, this is how a group work happens. I ask them, you need to provide answers to your questions. So in order to write a question, they have to read the materials. In order to answer the question, they have to reread the materials and make sure that the questions are good, because they're going to share with their group members. So if there are 3 people in the group, they will share their questions and items. They will read the answers, and very, very indirectly, I am pushing them towards reading the questions, since all of them had read the text, had written the questions. So when they look at one another's questions and answers, at least they know the answers and the questions within the group, and then it's going to go beyond the group. And every member should make comments. So to apply your group members' feedback if you agree with them. For example, one student says, okay, this item is not good because, and you don't agree. So this would lead to more discussion. You may want to discuss it with group members. And you may use your assigned or additional materials you may find. Sometimes they disagree. It has happened many times. They disagree. So what they do to sort of support their positions, they refer to the books and materials and sometimes internet. That is okay. When they jump onto internet, they have to read. That's one of my purposes, to make our students read. And however, you need to document. You know, it is something to catch them, that they would not just exchange the ideas orally. They have to write it down, and one person would collect them and send it to the teacher. This writing down enhances their learning. One person is selected as group coordinator every week in a rotary system, and see what kind of responsibilities this guy has, and please pay attention to what is going to happen to their learning. So you cut and paste the members' TPQs and answers into a single file and share it with group members. In this copying and pasting, okay, this person has to read the questions at least very superficially. There, some learning happens. 2, They lead the within group discussion to select the best TPQs. You see, when there are, let's say, 3 people and 9 questions, they have to discuss, because I need only 2 questions. They have to select the best TPQs, and this selection would lead to some arguments and discussion. That is learning. And then prepares a file and shares it with the group. Put selected questions at the top. I don't really care, between you guys, you are insiders. I don't really care where the question is. But the more instructions you give them, first of all, they understand following the instructions. They have to read the instructions. That is learning, okay? And organizing the questions and items is another skill that they learn. All TPQs with responses and scenarios with solutions. And then when finalized, send it to the instructor. No later than Sunday, for example. So they understand meeting deadlines. They understand being concerned with time, self-regulation, in fact. And then upload the copy into Dropbox or any other social media platform you have. One important point that you may notice, students exchange individual, pair, and group work with other individuals, pairs, groups. That is what we call peer feedback, the very first step in feedback. Then they make necessary modifications on the basis of peer feedback. In fact, peer feedback functions as feed forward for them. Then they send their original draft feedback to the teacher. Instructor provides further feedback. And this feedback loop usually takes a couple of weeks. And the significant outcome of this hidden agenda as students learning. Students learn through this process. There are hundreds of articles on feedback, types of feedback, etc., etc. But I haven't seen many studies on how effective these feedbacks are, because students usually don't pay attention to the feedback. Now, what teachers need to do? Teachers need to be open with the students, share everything with the students. Nothing is secret to the teacher. The more you share, the more students feel that they are someone in the class. Involve students in the discussion. Don't ever, well, I mean, that's strong. Please do not start discussion between you and a student. Try to direct them amongst it. Don't worry about the time. So many teachers complain that we have to cover a lot and we don't have time. And I think we have enough time, more than enough time. Our strategies are not efficient. You cannot do much in 90 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes in class. Even if you talk for 60 minutes and wear out yourself, learning is not going to happen. Engage learners in self and peer assessment. Now, sometimes students are harsher on themselves than on their peers. And this leads to discussion. And that is what I like about it, because when they discuss, discussion leads to learning. Put learners in the feedback loop all the time. All the time. They should understand that if I gave them a feedback and they revised it, and I'm going to look at the difference between the first one and the revised one in order to see how much they used the feedback. Design assessment tasks as learning tasks. And important, assign multiple stages for the completion of assignments. The moment you gave a grade to an assignment, it is finished. Students won't look at them. But if you give them opportunities to prepare the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, and grade it in the last step, that all feedback, feed-forward process and learning has happened, then it's going to be effective. assign the grade at the last step. What I usually do, for example, for the first version, I say, if I have to grade this assignment, you're going to get 5 out of 10, but you have the opportunity to implement the comments and improve your grades. Remember, I'm not a kind of enemy of the students. I am trying to help them to learn as much as they can. And this, if my feedback helps, why not? Learners' responsibility. Many learners have been educated in a predominantly lecture-based environment. That's what I experienced when I came here. And I'm sure, not sure, but because I don't know right now, but probably Iran has the same context. They prefer a passive role and do not trust either their teachers or their peers. That's why they hide everything. And LOA attempts to establish trust. If I believe in my students believe in one another, and all believe in me, there is no place for being dishonest. If they don't know something, they freely announce, they freely ask, and not me, but everybody can respond. So it is not something that to push people why you do not know. They work on the tasks. As they work on the tasks as learning tasks, at the same time they are being assessed by themselves, by peers, and by the teacher. This way, we put responsibility on the shoulders of the learner, and the new trend in teaching is outside of class learning should be 10 times more than inside class learning. In inside class, we have very limited time. If we can spend that time on directing students, what so many people say, teaching them to learn how to learn, I've heard it 100 times, but never seen it, never experienced it. And it, of course, it requires time, energy. Okay, to sum up, LOA, in my experience, in the last 2 decades, encouraged self and peer assessment for both learning and assessment purpose. Enhanced group cooperation. In my reflections from my students at the beginning of the term, they say, I hate group work because people don't feel responsible. They don't do their own share. Everything is left on my shoulder, etc., etc. And I tell them, one part of group work is your responsibility to encourage your group members to participate, to contribute. Of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of people would never do that, but I wouldn't sacrifice 95% for 5%. Improved self-regulations. You cannot imagine how many follow-ups they send to one another. Hey, look, the deadline is tonight, midnight. The deadline is tomorrow. Please, quick. And this is self-regulation, autonomy. Engage students in the course without any pressure. I never asked them, did you read the materials? Why didn't you read the materials? Because I am sure if they do not read the materials, they cannot make TPQs or thought-provoking questions. They cannot talk about reflective essay. They cannot do self-assessment. That is why it makes me take it for granted that they all study. And minimize the extent of academic dishonesty to almost zero, which is one of the major concerns, especially in pandemic, that, oh, they cheat, they do this and do that. Honest to God, if you follow LOA, it almost non-exists in this philosophy, because students don't look at the test or a quiz or the assignment as something that to be graded, but they look at them as, okay, let me see how much I learned, not what grade I'm going to get. And this is when it is established, then it is beautiful to observe students' activities. Remove the stress of tests and exams. I don't have midterms, I don't have finals, I don't have any kind of test. All my assessment is ongoing from the very first day of the class to the last day. Even I was questioned by the university, midterm and finals are required. I said, not in my system. Because finals, to me, are the least useful activity ever, because after the final, nobody sees one another, they don't receive any feedback, they don't know how they did, and they don't have any opportunity to improve. Midterm, okay, you can try, but final, I don't think there is any need. Remove the need of midterms and finals. Actually, you know, some universities, I think Iran is like this, 60% of the grade should be given to the final, and I never understood why. If I am doing fine in class, why should I get 60% of my final grade on my memorization of the materials that I have learned from the class? I am fairly confident that it would work for many teachers in many fields, in many contexts, for many learners in a pleasant manner. And if, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the concept, I just try to refresh your memories, but if you need any more information, I would be willing to provide you with all the principles and details of LOA in another opportunity. Before closing it, I would like to receive a 200-word reflection of yours of this session. What was useful, what was not useful, what you need more. If we had a chance to talk for the next time, what do you want me to focus on? Okay, and I would like to receive it by tomorrow. Thank you so very much, and I'm open to your questions. Now you can change whatever you want.
Professor Farhady, will you just stop sharing your screen?
Stop sharing my screen. Oh, where is it? Here? No. Where was it? Here? No. Here? Stop sharing.
Yes,
okay.
Stop sharing. Yes, there it is. Oh, Professor Farhady, that was beautiful. I mean, I have attended so many presentations, but in your presentation, there is this theory and practice intertwined in the most beautiful way. I think you have given us food for the rest of our lives to think about. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Farhady. I'm sure it's going to mark a new chapter in our job of teaching English in our school. On the last, probably the last point before you closed your presentation was about how much weight does midterm or how much weight does final exam carry in traditional teaching or in modern teaching, in postmodern teaching. So I'm so proud to say, Professor Farhady, that in our language school, midterm and final together carry only 25% of the overall.
That's very good. That is very good. Very good.
Yeah. And here I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from this language school who are really young, Professor Farhady. I think the average age range is about 25, 24 or something.
I can see some of the pictures.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of them. And actually, they are the motivation I wanted to request that you kindly actually present to us, and you really generously accepted. So we really appreciate this opportunity of a lifetime. Okay. So let's see if the attendees have any questions to ask Professor Farhady.
We have a few minutes to take some questions if there is.
Okay. Mr. Ibrahimi, Ms. Ghasemlu, if you are there, if you have any questions or if your group mates have any questions, do not hesitate, please, because we don't want to waste Professor Farhady's time. Actually, more than this. So far, the session has been nearly 1 hour. So I think, Professor Farhady, if you have something about 5 to 10 minutes, we can ask questions, you think?
No, no, I'm good, and I'm good. And if there is anything that I can be of any help, you have my email, you have my contact number. I'll be always happy to help. Thank you so very much. And
Thank you,
then
Professor Farhady.
we will end it. Thank you so very much.
Professor Farhady.
Yes.
So I think one question one of the participants wanted to ask is, the changes you talked about, which have happened in teaching, do you think they have been reflected in textbooks, or textbooks are behind these changes and these transformations?
Where are you talking? Are you talking about Iran, or are you talking about like?
No, I mean everywhere in the world.
Well, I would say in the United States, yes. In the United States, because they started something like assessment reform around 1800 or something. I'm sorry, 1980s, like 40, 50 years ago. And it took them 20 years to educate teachers. Okay, because to me, a teacher is the heart and the brain of education. If you have good teachers, many things can be solved. But in other places, in this part of the world, no. In this part of the world, I see many textbooks, even at the university level, the same traditional business of read the passage, answer the questions, varieties of tasks. It is not really the textbook, it is the process through which teacher and students go. Okay, I don't need any textbook. I can go to class, okay, and start this kind of negotiation with the students, and I can teach them more than textbook.
I see. I see.
I used to be in IUST, Iran University of Science and Technology, some 20 years ago, and there my MA students were telling me that استاد من یه جوری مجبور شدم خیلی بیشتر از اونه که در سیلابوس هست بخونم. اوکی، در صورتی که مشکل عمده ما این بود که بچه‌ها بخونن میان سر کلاس. Okay, so it happens, it is successful, but I think if there is an intention, good intention, I think it would be nice to start a set of locally valid, globally important textbooks for our own education. Okay, not وزارت آموزش پرورش, no, government business, no, but private institutions, okay, they can, and I am positive that if you invest on it, you will get millions and billions, even money-wise.
I see. So that's a lot of motivation for this team, Professor Farhady, because as I told you, some of the people who are attending this webinar actually are members of a team working on creating a textbook. We know it's going to take a long time, and we know that we need a lot of insight from scholars and professors like you. But I am very positive about the value of what the group is going to create.
Yeah, I think it is possible. It is possible and doable. The amount of talent and intelligence I have seen in Iranian students, you know, I've taught from elementary school up to PhD in the most prestigious universities. I have seen many people, many students. I strongly believe that Iranian students at any level, if they are not more intelligent and talented than any other place in the world, they are not less.
Yeah.
We just آب نداریم شنا کنیم. That's the whole point.
That's right. That's definitely right. Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Farhady. You really won't scale me to thank you.
It was a pleasure.
I hope that someday we can host you in Zanjan and give you Halim in Zanjan, or take you to old places in Zanjan, and return your favor in some ways, Professor Farhady.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
If I had changed one epsilon any one of the teachers, that is my best reward.
You have changed a lot. I mean, you have inspired thousands of people, including us today. Thank you so much, Professor Farhady.
Have a very good rest of the day. Bye bye.
You too. Take care. Bye. بچه‌ها یه لحظه کامراها رو روشن کنید، بلند چیزا رو هم روشن کنید.
فوتو یادمون رفت با دکتر فرهادی.
آره متاسفانه. آخه بچه‌ها قرار بود سوال بپرسن، کسی سوال نپرسید و من مجبور شدم خودم این رو ادامه بدم تا اینکه خب حالا در هر صورت خوشحالم که اون اصل قضیه اتفاق افتاد و دکتر فرهادی پرزنت کردن. خب ببینید واقعیتش اینه که یکی از تعریف‌هایی که در مورد دکتر فرهادی من شنیده بودم و امروز به واقعیت پیوست این بود که در هر پرزنتیشنش یه چیز جدید داره. وقتی شروع کرد پرزنتیشن من احساس کردم ممکنه همون پرزنتیشنی باشه که من تو تبریز شرکت کردم و اینها، ولی یه دفعه دیدم نه، قشنگ رفت به یه جاهای دیگه‌ای و مطمئناً بچه‌ها امیدوارم با من هم عقیده باشید که بسیار جا برای فکر کردن داره حرفایی که ایشون زد و من واقعاً دوست دارم که پرکتیس ما، شکل پرکتیس تیچینگ ما بره در قالب تفکرات آدمایی مثل دکتر فرهادی و خیلی خوشحالم که اینطوری هم بوده. خب کامراها رو هم روشن کردید، استاد ابراهیمی، استاد قاسمی، استاد رجویون، استاد بیات، استاد مظفری، استاد فخریلو. چرا هیچ کدومتون هیچ حرفی نزدید بابا؟ یه سوالی، یه ریزندی.
آخه ببینید یه جورایی انقدر واضح توضیح دادم بعد یه جورایی یه سری سوالا رو قبلا توی رانت‌های قبلی خب از یه سری از مهمون‌های قبلی پرسیده بودیم